for lack of better words, I was like, well, think of it as research with drama. So often when in psychology to psychology students, we tend to forget all the unique things that come with research, but also we use all those research methods in evaluation. So we get more of that flavor, those dynamics, those interpersonal relations. We're collecting data in naturalistic settings, and that's how I initially introduced evaluation to them. So it's a challenging field and a challenging angle when you're dealing with varying cultures and integrating diverse perspectives and so on and so forth. However, intrinsically, I get a lot of joy from that, and I learn a lot myself as well. And I do realize that it is an exchange. So hello, everyone. Again, I am Ciara Knight, and it's great seeing all of you here today. So before we start, I just want to check in with Karen. We are going to be recording this session. Oh, I do see that you're recording. Great. And I just want to be respectful and let everyone else know that's in attendance that we are recording it. So if your faces pop up, if you don't want your face to pop up, please feel free to just turn your cameras off. All right, great. And let me get started. So our last talk was with Dr. Ciara, and it concerned language in evaluation. And Ciara led a great talk and discussion around language and how we define language, or how do we sit with stakeholders and define the language that we use around culture, evaluation, social justice, equity, and so on and so forth, which led to, okay, action. How do we talk about action? And Karen reached out to me and I said, okay, I'll be happy to talk about preparing for the evaluation from a CRE lens, cultural responsive evaluation and equity lens. I would like to begin with sharing a little picture. This is from, I believe, 3 years ago, and Dr. Dana Wanzer is in the audience today. And I would say this is pre-COVID 50. So not the COVID-15 gain, the pre-COVID 50 gain, where we had a presentation with Dr. Mertens. And my major takeaway from this presentation with Dr. Mertens was that, well, one, contextual factors are often revealed through unrevealed voices, those hidden voices that are often missed. Also, the evaluator's job is to reveal those voices and represent their reality in the program theory and every aspect of the evaluation. I want to lead with that, because when we are preparing for the evaluation, this must be our focal point when we're doing it from a culturally responsive and equity-based lens. So I do want to start with discussing the culturally responsive evaluation framework. We have our CDC framework, which is for the Centers of Disease and Control evaluation framework, which is 6 steps, but the CRE framework has 9 steps, and the core center of it is cultural competence. We have that at the center of this framework. And my talk today talks about preparing for the evaluation. That very first step before you really fully engage with your stakeholders. So overall, the culturally responsive evaluation framework rejects that notion that evaluation is cultural free. It focuses on the needs of the program implementers and the recipients, as opposed to decision makers. And additionally, it accounts for multiple values and perspectives during the evaluation process. And particularly, it attends to historically marginalized groups. Those are those unrevealed or those hidden voices that are often left out in a lot of different discussion, which does include evaluation. So culture, even from a CRE standpoint, there's a lot that goes into it, and they have a general definition of it, and I do as well. When you think of culture and the culture of groups, this is actually their shared experiences or common experiences of people that can include their values or customs, their languages, their worldviews, their way of knowing and communicating, This could be their racial, ethnic background, religious background, class, so on and so forth, even geographical region. And so with culture, there are different ways of knowing things. So that epistemology can differ among culture. Also, different values, which is this is a challenging word I always have with this word, that axiology. And then there's the ontology that we often talk about, which is the varying perspectives of what is real and reality. And culture shapes this, and it will differ across different cultures. That's important for us to know as evaluators. So that first step, preparing for the evaluation, well, this essentially concerns the responsibility of the evaluators. As evaluators, we are responsible for educating ourselves before we actually interact with program staff, community members, and participants, before we fully engage with our stakeholders. And this means that we need to be attentive to contextual factors, what's valued or not valued when it comes to relationships, power dynamics, and prioritization of the community needs. So this is how we prepare. This is our concern or responsibility for preparing for an evaluation from a culturally responsive lens. So my talk actually adds that equity lens to it as well. So there's been a shift in CRE. The underlying theory and conceptualization of CRE had equity in mind. However, it wasn't fully highlighted in a lot of the research and the materials that we talk about. So now we're adding that E to the CRE to really bring equity to the forefront, because ultimately that was the initial goal of CRE. So I have 3 stages in which I would like to talk about preparing for the evaluation. First, I'd like to talk about, well, the common approach, like a common approach to preparing for an evaluation, the CRE approach to preparing for an evaluation, and that equity focus of preparing for evaluation. So when preparing for an evaluation, let's start with culture and context. It's very important to emphasize this because programs are nested. It's hard to tease out contextual factors from the program. Programs do not sit in silos. They're usually attached to an organization. Whatever happens to that organization filters down to the program, and that can impact how the program's run. That can also impact the evaluation. There are also political factors we have to consider, which really boils down to power dynamics. And then there's communities that are that the program is nested in, and also those cultural factors that we'll get into a little bit more. So before I go on, I actually like to have this to be a more interaction, because we're among colleagues and your perspectives and values and opinions matter as well. And with cultural and cultural responsiveness, it's a very dynamic process. You don't become fully culturally competent. You're constantly learning and growing from that, and you can constantly improve. But part of that is our interactions with others and integrating their perspectives and their experiences. So with that being said, I'm interested in knowing about, what do you think is the role of equity when preparing for evaluation? Okay, what is the role of equity when preparing for evaluation? And excuse me here, I have to double check. So what is the role of equity in preparing for evaluation? Okay, I want you to think a little bit about equity first. So with that being said, we are going to divide you into breakout rooms so you can meet each other and learn from each other and discuss what you think about, what you think the role of equity is when preparing for the evaluation. And you will have 8 minutes to discuss this. All right. And Karen, if you could please break everyone out into their rooms.
No, it must still be in there.
Okay. Do we have everyone back in?
Doesn't look like it.
Oh, some good
Yeah, a few
conversations
more
are going.
seconds. I think Zoom just pulled them all back. So if they didn't do it on their own, they should be on their way back now.
Yeah.
Yes, it did. It kicked us out.
All the disappointment. Those good conversations going. All right, great. So actually, I'm interested in what you all discussed. Who would like to share? And I think you can just raise your hand, and I should see the raised hand. And I don't know if you see a different view, Karen. So what do you think is the role of equity when preparing for the evaluation?
I can jump in, Ciara. I don't see the raised hand, but I can report out from some of the things that were said in my group.
Okay, great. Thank you, CREE.
People mentioned thinking about power, who has the power, also thinking about who is involved with the program and the role of the people and their lived experiences and how they might interact with the program, and also what's their role in the decision making of the program. We had conversation around context and conditions that affect the lives of individuals who are participating with the program. And then someone also discussed including an evaluation question that's explicit about issues of equity. Yeah.
And I think, Sherry, that led to, right before we click back into the large group, is really being clear about our languaging equity. We would be talking with a variety of stakeholders, and I think we would need to make sure that we have language to describe, what equity is and what we're after if we're doing interviews or survey research, focus groups, etc., for those groups. So it made sense to them and was contextualized within their lived experiences. So.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. Those were some really good topics that you discussed, and language is very important when it comes to CRE and that approach, and even our AEA statement on cultural competency emphasizes the use and the role in defining language when interacting with different cultural communities.
Some additional things that our group talked about was thinking about the order in which you do things, so that if you're trying to make sure you have the right voices, that if you do things in whether it's surveys, focus groups, interviews, in a different order, you'll have a different outcome. And thinking about how you define your stakeholders to make sure that that you're capturing all the stakeholders, but also making sure that you understand who was involved in the coming up with the logic model, coming up with the evaluation process, and sort of everything along the way. Thinking about how people's roles are defined in both coming up with it and being involved in the evaluation.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, great, good job. So you all hit the mark when it comes to equity, but what I am hearing is the role of equity in the various steps in the evaluation process. Some of it concerns preparing for the evaluation, which is that initial step. A lot of it concerned actual engaging with the stakeholders or designing the evaluation, designing the questions, and so on and so forth. So when it comes to preparing for the evaluation, you're gathering as much information as possible about the program and the contextual factors in which the program is situated in. And that equity component really is getting at whose voices should be weighted more in the evaluation process. You're getting that initial run of whose voices should be weighted more in the evaluation process. So let's talk a little bit about what equity is. And so I have this little diagram of people standing on books and people not. Equity, which is different from equality, is when you're reallocating resources and your focus to those who need it most. And you're elevating them so they're on, for lack of a better word, a level playing field in comparison to everyone else. So when you're taking a more equitable approach, you're not negatively impacting anyone that's already seeing an advantage, that are already doing well. You're elevating those who need everyone else. And so what this means for preparing for the evaluation, and again, this is my interpretation based upon my own practice of evaluation. It's about understanding the program from that CRE lens, the contextual factors, not just the program, that means the community and so on and so forth, organization, and the equity lens is focusing it, saying, we want to know who voices should be weighted more in the evaluation process. What should we be focusing on? And what should I focus on as an evaluator when I do finally engage with those primary stakeholders? Okay? It's giving me a lens to focus the efforts on those who need it the most. And I do see chat is highlighted, but I cannot actually see, oh, there we go, the chat box. I just wanted to check.
You're good.
Okay, great, thank you.
Sorry,
you,
there's
Sharon.
a lot to wade through there.
Yes. I see the little orange going off, and that's why I wanted to check. So let's go on to a common approach to preparing for an evaluation. So preparing for an evaluation activity is the common approach. Well, typically we review material about the program. We visit the program site. We observe program staff and participants if we can, and we review research and previous evaluations and theories. That's typically what we do. We're preparing and trying to understand that program. So you may have been introduced to the program by means of an RFP, request for a proposal, a grant, a colleague, or maybe it's a program that you've worked with before. But generally, you're reviewing the material, you're looking at their websites, you're looking at any documentation. You may drive around the program site or just pop in if it's a publicly available site. That's typically what we do. And that's a good start. Okay, that is a good start. For a CRE approach, where we're preparing for an evaluation, well, we do everything that any evaluator would do, so that common evaluation approach. However, there's another aspect of it, meaning that we are visible and accessible to marginalized staff and participants. We're making ourselves visible. We don't have to necessarily tell our role because that may affect later on the design, but we're making sure that we're a visible presence there, particularly amongst those unrevealed voices or those hidden faces. Also, we tend to connect with marginalized stakeholders from similar programs to help us understand our existing program and maybe getting that other perspective. We may visit community spaces of participants. And a good example is actually Dr. Katrina Bledsoe's example for her evaluation of the Fun with Books program, where she went and she visited the community, walked around, right? Went to the hot spots to get a sense of the actual space and the environment in which participants actually live in. And also one aspect that we always forget, and I feel like it's always left out, but it is very much a focal point for cultural responsiveness, is to assess our own culture, our values, and beliefs. This is critical for us to do. And I want us to think a little bit more about that, our own culture, values, and belief. And I want you to think about, why should evaluators assess their own culture, values, and beliefs? And I'm going to send you back to your teams to discuss, why would this be important?
In here in about 40 seconds.
Oops, I'm in.
Hello, friends. Welcome back. Did you want to share out?
Great, thank you. So yes, I do want to hear what you all discussed.
And if you want to share at this point, especially since people are trying to keep their cameras off, just feel free to unmute and share with the group. And if we end up in a situation where we're talking over each other, we'll figure that out as we go.
This is Rakesh Mohan. One of the things in our group we discussed, that was the first thing Laurie Wingate mentioned, that why we have to consider our own values and beliefs. That may be easier to do than how we do it, because it's a challenging process to look in the mirror about our own values. So that was an important point that was made, and then the other point was that it's not a process that starts one day and on day 3 or day 10 we say, okay, we are all done. It's an ongoing process, and then we are always surprised, or often we are surprised that when we are deep in the project, or even the project is done, and a couple of years later we find out, well, how come we did not think about that?
That is great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Rakesh. Yes, exactly. It's not easy to do, and it's an ongoing process that you do throughout the evaluation. Okay, and the reason why we do this is because, well, we come to the evaluation with our own culture. Okay, we have our own experiences, our own values, our own worldviews, our own ways of knowing, our own racial, ethnic background, sexual orientation, gender, geographic region that we are from, that we bring with us. And when we reflect on this, it is ongoing. And these are some questions we need to think about before we even interact with anyone in the program. So this is during that preparing for the program. Where am I from? What are my beliefs, right? What are my vocations and avocations? What do I see as resources I can use in this evaluation? That's ultimately what you're getting at. What can you use to help you understand and relate during the evaluation? What are some potential opportunities given your background, or some challenges or conflicts that you may have? You're thinking through this throughout the evaluation process, and this does start before you actually interact with your stakeholders. And this also includes, what stereotypes do I hold? And the reason why we do this is because evaluation is an interaction between cultures. Once an evaluator starts interacting with the program, that program in that context has shifted. It's no longer the same because the evaluator brought their culture into the fold. Okay, this is why we need to do our self-reflection. And in order to do this, I mean, another reason why we do this is we want to find out about our own biases, right? Because ultimately, we want to make sure we're ensuring the good and the well-being of others. And that does mean we take a hard look at ourselves and address any biases we may have, and also assess where our knowledge lies and where we're limited. And that also helps us to form our evaluation team. So we're already thinking about, okay, I'm limited in this area, or I have a challenge with this. I need to overcome this, and I also need to get someone on board with my team that has this as a strength, right? So now going to that equity focus, right? Adding this equity lens to it. And remember, we're trying to dig and prioritize the hidden voices, those unrevealed voices, the ones that need the services the most. the ones that really should be benefiting from this program. And that includes reviewing credible research and theories from hidden publications. So, well, what do I mean by that? Well, depending on your discipline, we have certain journals as search engines that we just run to. And it might be, let's see, Journal of Higher Education, right? Very general. But there are also publications that are credible, peer-reviewed, that focuses on specific groups and communities. So there's the Negro Journal of Higher Education. So if you're evaluating an education program or a program, education-based program for Blacks or a Black community, well, you probably should review those publications in addition to the well-known public publications. They get at additional nuances that are more common or, I guess, salient publications get at, right? And you're getting at a different way of knowing, a different perspective of conducting research with these communities. Also, you should be able to know who the decision makers are in the program and the communities, right? The reason why is you want to know about those power dynamics, right, ultimately. And you want to see who's sitting at the table. So I do have Merton cited here because in that picture she came to talk about her transformative approach to evaluation. And she talked about creating coalitions or using coalitions, using committees, and having the evaluator or the evaluation team be part of that, but also looking around and seeing who's seated at the table. Are the people sitting at the table look like the community they are serving? Okay. If they do not, or they have no representation, that's already an issue surrounding equity. Okay, and you're prepared to go and interact with the stakeholders and learn more from their perspective about the evaluation with this note in your head that, hey, you know, I looked on the website and saw the leading committee and it doesn't look like they are reflective, there's any reflection of the community sitting among these decision makers. Okay, and you can use that as a point of conversation when you do interact with the program stakeholders. So overall, just to summarize all of this, is that typically for common evaluation approaches, we immediately look at organizational dynamics and we look at the program, we look at those contexts. And based upon some of your responses, immediately it was about the program, the organization. There were some that mentioned the community, but that is a very common approach and that's fine. We should look at that. But with CRE, we're bringing forth those cultural contexts, political contexts. We're looking at the community and we're bringing that to the forefront. Then you add that equity lens and you're focusing on who needs the most attention. Okay, the allocation of resources, and that includes the focus of the evaluation, those folks that are in most need. Ultimately, this does help with dismantling systematic racism during the evaluation process, right? So when you're bringing these hidden voices to the forefront, you're adding this additional layer to the program theory when you do get to that point of describing the program to stakeholders. You're better prepared to address power dynamics among decision makers. So if you sit down initially with those stakeholders and you start talking about the program and what they want from the evaluation, you're more prepared to talk about, hey, I noticed that your committee members include all these brilliant, talented people. What exactly are their experience with the community that you are serving? Do any of you live in the community that you serve? Do you have a cousin or a brother or sister that's part of that community? What is the connection? And if they do not, then that's a conversation you have about who are some folks that are best representations of the communities, maybe leaders of the communities. This may be former program participants that can come back as an ambassador and they can sit on that committee or that coalition. And as an evaluator, you're trying to ensure that they have equal power when it comes to making a decision about the evaluation in the process. And with that, right on time, this is very brief, and I do apologize for the disconnection. I do want to open up for the last couple of minutes for any questions, comments, or feedback. And mind you, there's more that goes into this process. This is just more of an outline of what goes into it. And again, I'm just focusing on that one step of preparing for the evaluation.
Ciara, there are some interesting comments and suggestions in the chat if you want to look through those.
Okay, great.
While we see if anybody is brave enough to ask a question out loud.
I have a question.
Hi, Holly.
Okay, yes, of course.
So what would you say, in your experience, could you give me an idea of what an evaluation that doesn't have this lens looks like compared to the same evaluation that has this lens?
So an evaluation that doesn't have this lens actually typically looks very similar to our standard research process, but just applicable into naturalistic settings. So we get our RFP or grant, we read through it, we contact the person that is written on there as a contact to get a little bit more information so we can write up a proposal for that RFP. And we may look at some websites, if they have websites, Google some information about the funder and so on and so forth, and then go on from there. But what's often missed is, okay, let's look about the regional area. What are the demographics? Where is this program located? And where are they providing services? Are people coming to them for services, or are they going to the people that need the services? If so, let's look at where they are going to understand those communities. That's typically a reflection of what someone from a CRE lens would do, is really look at those rich contextual factors in the effort to identify those hidden voices and in the effort to identify those that really would benefit the most from the evaluation in the program. So the questioning, the design is catered to focus on those that are in need.
Holly, I'd like to make a comment to that, just super quick. One, like sometimes you don't think about maybe how, if you're doing a longitudinal study or you're trying to track people long term, you might think, okay, we get certain contact information from them. When we work with folks that are likely to move around a lot, right? People live in apartments and things like that. One of the questions we ask them is, who, do you have an aunt or do you have someone in your family or grandmother? Who is it that has not moved in the past how many ever years and is likely to not move in the next so many years? And most families have somebody who's like that. And you ask for that person's contact information so that you can track students who otherwise are very challenging to track. So understanding a culture enough to know what questions to ask is step one, right? So that, you know, sometimes you get information that's useless in 2 days versus
Definitely.
if you don't ask those right questions up front. So we have some projects dealing with, you know, certain populations. We've been able to track them 10, 15, 20 years because of the approach to asking to figure out how to stay in contact with people, right? So depending on, you know, even if, you know, if you're dealing with a tribal population, maybe you need to have the tribal leaders. Certain other populations, maybe an aunt. So you need to know the culture well enough to know which questions to ask up front.
So alternatively, you would, if you didn't ask those questions, the traditional researcher would say, we just have a lot of missing data.
Yes. The data that you've collected then is biased when you don't have those voices there. It's just, if they're not represented, the data is biased. And what Melissa's getting at is actually getting access what we're known to as gatekeepers in communities. So if you're getting to that grandma or that auntie or that uncle or that elder that's likely to stay in the same spot, getting access to them is highly valuable because then you get access to other hidden voices and key information about the community. So that is a challenge, and you do need to know what questions to ask. You do need to understand the community that you're working with. However, I do caution that this is only to help guide you for when you interact with your stakeholders. This is not designed to be, oh, okay, I know everything about the community, I'm gonna go ahead and do whatever. No, it's just guidelines. And what you read doesn't mean that that is actually the real truth until you are actually interacting with those key stakeholders. So I don't wanna have people lead into stereotyping. So I do caution against that. But yes, you do need to have a general understanding of the community.
Thank you.
So with that said,
hi, this is David Sewell.
Hi, David.
You mentioned a key word there, which is something that I pay attention to, and it's bias. And bias ultimately affects the validity. So when you introduce bias, you have now affected your validity, whether it's of your assessments or of your evaluation findings. And so that, to me, is where I'm focusing on, is hitting at the heart of the matter, which is validity.
And credibility. If we want folks to use that evaluation and they don't see that their voice of their communities are represented, are they likely to pay attention? And also it might leave a sour note in their mouth, which a lot of marginalized communities are, they already have from the researchers helicoptering in and causing a lot of harm and then leaving them. So yes, thank you. I do know we went over time. I do have my information here if you would like to contact me. I am on Twitter, not as much, but trying to get as much activity on Twitter as possible. And I do see some of my, the folks I follow on Twitter here. Thank you very much. And I'm definitely open to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Ciara.
Thank you, Ciara.